Who would narrate your life? Who would you choose to narrate if you had a narrator?
Morgan Freeman.
I was thinking that too.
I think everybody.
Welcome to Morgan Freeman's life.
Die slow, boys.
She walked into the kitchen to grab some coffee.
It's so calming. I could use a little of that in my life.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the Buffalo Community Podcast. This is episode 18, and we'd like to thank everybody that's listened, and we want to thank you for sharing and subscribing, and if you can, please leave us a review. But before we get this week's episode started, we need that introduction.
This is the Buffalo Community Podcast, all about the greatest small town in the USA, the people in it, and how it all works together. Here are your hosts,
Just
Tyler
don't
Reese
pretend they're not there.
and Mark Benzer.
Oh, yeah. That's a sick fade again.
Yeah.
3 weeks in a row.
Fire. Awesome. Well, Betsy, thanks for coming in.
You bet.
And we appreciate you having taken some of your time to learn a little bit about you and what you do and how you help people and make Buffalo a great place to live. So we really appreciate it. But a little bit about Mrs. Kelley is she was a 2002 graduate from Minnesota State University Moorhead.
Go Dragons.
You bet.
Yeah. Still can't say Moorhead State University. It's
MSUM.
MSUM.
Yeah.
That's
I
right.
did that shift when I was there.
Yeah. Oh, wow. 2010 graduate from St. Thomas, where you got your master's degree,
Correct.
and then also a K-12 reading specialist certificate through the state of Minnesota.
Yes.
You're married. You have 2 kids.
Yeah.
And why don't you tell us a little bit about, maybe take us back 10 years or so. Let's go 15 years. You've been teaching for 15 years?
Yeah.
Roughly?
Yeah.
And bring us here to today, 2020.
So professionally, let's see. So yeah, I was a classroom teacher for about 8 years or so until I had my kiddos. Mm-hmm. And during that time, I wanted to be able to work part-time and stay in education. So after teaching in the classroom, which I loved, I learned that there's so much more to learn about reading. And so that's when I pursued my master's degree, at the same time becoming a new mom. And it was kind of a neat pursuit because I realized...
Not busy at all, are you?
No, wasn't busy. Pregnant, taking graduate classes. And yeah, it was fantastic because I learned pretty quickly that that's actually an area in the field where I could work part-time because, you can't be a classroom teacher and work part-time. So that was a great opportunity. So after I graduated from St. Thomas, I was able to utilize those skills, and I started tutoring right away and using those skills as I transitioned out of the classroom and then into being a reading specialist. After staying home for a few years with my babies, I decided to go back and see if there was a way to be a reading specialist in a school. I had really missed the school environment. And lo and behold, there was more and more schools you're seeing are employing reading specialists. Mm-hmm. And I've worked in the Catholic school circuit for almost my whole career. And Catholic schools are starting to employ more of them. So I worked as a reading specialist at a Catholic school in St. Paul for about 3 years. And then also I had a stint as their librarian because I actually wanted to transition back to the regular classroom. I missed it. But during that time, I was active as their reading specialist and then also worked with the public schools to help students receive special education services during that time. And then, after that, we made a transitional move out here to Buffalo, and I started working as a first grade teacher at St. Francis Xavier here in town. And I loved it, and more in talking to the community, I learned that there really isn't anybody in the area that does the sort of reading work that I do. Mm-hmm. And especially children in first grade where they're learning to read, I noticed sort of a deficit. So I took all the knowledge that I have, and I've always wanted to have my own space. I've always tutored at libraries and in people's homes and in schools, and I really wanted a place to be able to dedicate to it. And it sort of all came together. There was a need. And so here we are today. I have an office, and I'm rolling with it. I'm going to do the classroom teaching and help kids in my studio at the same time.
So located downtown Buffalo.
Correct.
Right up the hill from Buffalo Lake. Can you see the lake from your office?
You bet. I've got a full view
Nice.
from that second floor. It's
Perfect.
pretty awesome.
Perfect. When people hear reading specialist,
Right.
you're not just teaching kids to read. There's so much more to that. If you had to narrow it down to, in layman's terms, your 3 sentences about what a reading specialist is and how that's a differential from just a tutor.
Right. So it's very specific, right? Teaching reading is a science. And did you know that human beings actually aren't meant to read? It is a man-made invention. So for those that are struggling to read, 70% of the population will pick it up with regular techniques in the academic classroom. 30% of children will not, or just people in general. So they need specific, direct, systematic, prescriptive instruction, and that's what I do. I have the training that I have from the University of St. Thomas combined with the extra training that I have with Orton Gillingham and other techniques that I've learned from across the country provide that very systematic instruction.
So it could be that you have a child or you're somebody who's struggling with reading and it's not clicking. You called it prescriptive. You could think of maybe where you have a medical issue that's not getting better and you keep trying to do this one thing, but it won't get better until you see somebody who can prescribe some sort of, am I kind of on the right track there in terms of like, you can keep doing the same thing over and over again, and it's if you're not getting better, or your child's not getting better, it's not because they aren't trying or they aren't smart or it's they're going to require a prescriptive approach.
Correct.
That you can offer.
And that's what I saw in the regular classroom, which prompted me to want to do something in literacy, because I kept doing the things that I was taught to do in my undergraduate program, and I thought, why are still half of my students really struggling? So I saw that there has to be something more, right? And so and then there's the second component where we in our country have this belief that if you can't read, you're not intelligent. And it's so not true. And children are developing this sense of themselves. I'm telling you, I just taught first grade. By the end of first grade, they're already like, there's something wrong with me, I can't read. I mean, it's huge. And then adults are like, well, I don't read. I never read. I never finished any books. There is something to that. And so you're right. I mean, a lot of it too has to do with science. So I'm really big into research. I do a lot of the research. At some point I've said when I'm old and gray, I'm hoping to still get my doctorate and really do research in the field because, we just see these kids and there's something about visual imagery. They can't process the visual imagery in their brain, and it's neurological. It has a neurological base. So it really does even go into medicine.
Sure. Yeah.
And do you specialize with kids? What age group?
Right. I mean, I work with kids. I'm licensed for reading in grades K through 12.
Okay.
So but I have worked with a couple adults a couple times. They said, could you do your reading tests with me? So, I'm not a neuropsychologist, but I can do diagnostic reading assessments. So sometimes I just do testing for people or testing for parents in the area of reading so that we can figure out what's wrong. But yeah, even adults have said, "What is my reading rate really slow? Can you help me?"
I don't imagine that's an easy question to ask either. I mean,
no.
Or even as a parent, if your kid is struggling, because everybody thinks their kid is special, and to you, your kid is always special.
Of course, yes.
But to identify is it usually identified from a parent, from the school? I mean, usually. Timmy might need some help here, or
right.
How's that transition? I mean, how do you get involved outside of the classroom?
Right. It comes from a variety of places.
Sure.
So yeah, it's coming from the school. There's a lot of parents who have a hunch. We kind of always knew, especially when I see students in 4th or 5th grade. I'm always encouraging parents, to really keep an eye out earlier. The earlier the better. But yeah, I mean, I get involved usually when a teacher is referred or a parent figures out what I do. And sometimes parents are getting help or assessments from the special ed department in public schools. And then they say, they need reading intervention, or if they can't provide this type of intervention, they look for someone who does Orton-Gillingham. Sometimes parents are getting private neurological assessments, and then neurological psychologists are sending them to specific Orton-Gillingham trained or highly reading trained teachers to get the intervention they need.
You kind of alluded to it, and maybe you can expand on it a little bit. Is there a period? Well, my first question is, would there be a reason to not have you begin working with a child who's shown no issues? Like, could you give somebody a boost?
I see what you're saying.
Or do you primarily just specialize in kids that are struggling or kids that?
Great question. Yeah, can I answer that in two ways? First, the goal of what I do and people who believe in what I do and how we teach reading this way is to ultimately get this into the undergraduate programs. So teachers are learning these methods and they're teaching it to everyone. So when you teach 30% of the way 30% of the population needs to learn, and then that 70% is going to get it anyway, does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the hope is in the next 10 to 20 years, we're teaching this at the school level so all kids are learning this way. But to answer your question in a second way, absolutely. So I can tutor in every subject area, grades K through 6, because I'm a licensed K-6 elementary education teacher. In my practice right now, I see a little kiddo that's going to be going into kindergarten, and then I'm just helping to strengthen, reinforce those skills so that they have more success on those assessments when they go in.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And then you mentioned sooner the better. The sooner we recognize a problem or an area that needs improvement, the better the result. Or, is there a difference between getting a child in kindergarten or first grade than there is getting a kid in 5th or 6th grade?
Absolutely. And you're going to see debate in the field on that question. Some people are sort of like, let's just wait and see what happens. I absolutely disagree with that. I think that the earlier the better. If you think of neural pathways in the brain and how flexible they are, they even say like birth to 3 is that time when the brain is really absorbing so much of language. And so I would say the earlier the better, because as soon as they learn those habits, right, how are we breaking them? Mm-hmm. Think of a common thing that I see with children who struggle with reading. The B and the D, the lowercase b and d. Have you guys seen it? People reverse the letter. Mm-hmm. That's because actually dyslexics will see that letter as a B, a D, a P, and a Q. Because of their visual processing, they can actually switch that letter around in their mind. So if they're a 4th grader and they haven't had any intervention for if they have a reading disability, imagine how much harder it is to change that. Yeah. Just that one example versus if I get them at a kindergarten level, and we can work on kinesthetic, tactile ways to really set the brain pathways. We form this letter this way, this is what this letter says, and then that's how we move going forward.
I can see a big difference in my own kids. So I have a first grader and 2 kindergartners.
Right.
Emma took a huge jump from reading in kindergarten to reading books in first grade. But the boys are just a little bit slower. And I don't know if it's because they're boys or the fact that they're just listening to each other and cheating off of like, oh, I said what Charlie said, and
Absolutely.
that. And
yeah, they have that advantage. They have a team effort.
Exactly. But, is there a difference when in the reading development, between boys and girls?
I guess in 15 years of teaching, I would say not necessarily. I think that, if you talk about gender and you say that, this is just generally speaking, boys are a little more active, girls are a little more willing to kind of sit and listen. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but
sure. No,
I see it 50-50 as far as children that need intervention. I see it about the same.
Okay. Well, that's good to know, because I'm like, again, like just looking, because our kids are very close in age, and Emma's leaps and bounds ahead. And
yeah, I would look at that more objectively as far as what skills have they mastered, and looking at their trajectory of how successful they're going to be. Like, are they meeting all those benchmarks?
Sure.
That's really going to give you the clue of if they're progressing or not. There's parts of reading that I look at. I look at 5 strands when I assess children, and so you really want to see have they progressed past this part, and then where are we at with this part, and so on and so forth.
Sure. Kind of a sliding scale.
You bet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you ever get kids, this is more maybe somewhat random, do you ever get kids who you would never know they struggle with reading, more on the comprehension side? The words, they recognize them, they can read at a decent pace, mm-hmm. but just retention or, for whatever reason, they still could very much benefit from working with you without really struggling with, dyslexia or
Yes.
just
Yes, because you can have dyslexia, right? That's the buzzword with reading difficulties, but really we have a line of reading disabilities. We have people who have mild, moderate to severe dyslexia, and then you can have mild, moderate to severe just general reading disabilities. They range in so many different forms, and again, that's more of a neuropsych answer question. But here's the question I would ask: what's our ultimate goal when we read? And I always take a few minutes and I ask kids that, and I ask adults, and they're like, we're trying to learn, right? We want to get smarter. So if our ultimate goal is comprehension, that's really the golden prize at the end, and then higher levels of critical thinking. Yes, absolutely. It's funny because especially if anyone has sort of struggled and they've flown under the radar, especially kids that struggle with reading, even dyslexics are some of the most intelligent people in the world because they have to be creative. They have to get around. They have to work around a system that's not teaching them the way they need to learn.
It's a team project, guys. All right, you do the reading. I will do the actual manual labor part. And
Totally. But look up famous dyslexics. So yes, I mean, we have to be taught to comprehend, and that's the thing. People think by the time you're reading fluently, then all of a sudden the comprehension is just going to come. No, really not so. I mean, even adults, that's why they do book clubs. People want to talk about what they're reading. Sure. They want to talk about how someone else has interpreted it. So yeah, that's some of my most fun with some of my older students that I have, just to find them a book. That's so much fun. I think it's fun. Yeah. Try to find something that they love, something that they're like, I can't wait to see her next week because of this book we're reading and we're talking about it.
Sure.
That current book in our household is Dog Man or Dog Boy.
Oh, man, yes.
Whatever it is. Oh.
Dave Pilkey, highly dyslexic, talks about that, talks about his life and how he drew. He was out of the classroom because he was always a disruption. Now just advocating for children to read. Those books are really funny. Very actually smart funny.
Yeah.
Do you think kids are often misdiagnosed ADD, ADHD, when really it's a difficulty reading?
It's a good question. I always have to hide behind that I'm not a psychologist.
I get that, yeah.
But
whereas like so many problems would be solved if we could maybe get them from a reading tutor and avoid the prescription medication. I
think if we look at it from an adult perspective, if you think of something that you don't want to do, like I always liken it to exercise, right? You go to exercise, how many of us are really focused on it if we don't want to do it or we don't like it or we're sore? You're very easily distractible. So I think that's something that bears research, and I wouldn't doubt it. I mean, especially if you're someone who doesn't want to sit still or you are just generally easily distractible. Well, yeah, especially if it's hard. I mean, do we want to do things that are hard? Or people aren't, you're like, the way that this person's teaching this doesn't make any sense to me. But there is absolutely a correlation between, I've seen it, children who have other types of disabilities, and then we have the learning disabilities. Absolutely, there's typically seems to be some sort of an overlap.
So as we're getting into it, when kids start to read and maybe have an interest in that, or you want to bring that interest to your kid, what are some books that you'd recommend of getting them started with?
So many books, so little time. And you know what? I think that's why I was given the gift of being that librarian for a while, or maybe that was why when that position opened at my school, I got a great education for a year when I did that job. I'm a huge fan of Mo Willems.
Mo Willems.
Mo Willems wrote the Pigeon books. Do Not Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus is the epic pigeon book. But from the pigeon, I always say the pigeon is naughty, because he's kind of naughty. He's kind of a pain. He wrote this series called Elephant and Piggy. So we have Piggy, who's like this and always in a good mood. And then we have Gerald, who's always kind of a negative Nancy. And what's lovely about those books, they're beginning reading books. They were actually awarded the Dr. Seuss, Theodore Seuss Geisel Award for early literacy books because they're not only hilarious, parents love them, but they include intonation in the way that Mo writes them. So he uses capital letters when children should be shouting, small letters when they should be soft, talking softly. So those are fantastic. And any child, too, who's struggling to read, I said, Mom and Dad, go and buy these, buy them all, buy them now, and start reading them. I also really love Kate DiCamillo. Kate DiCamillo is from Minnesota, actually. She lives in Minneapolis. She's famous for Because of Winn-Dixie.
Okay.
And she's written fantastic books that are a lot of chapter books. She's one of the highest awarded Newbery winner authors. But she wrote
Tale of Despereaux.
Tale of Despereaux.
Yeah.
But she wrote Mercy Watson books. And that's the next step I always recommend after the Mo Willems books, because they're like mini chapter books. The kids laugh out loud at those. There's this pig, and she loves buttered toast, and she does the most hilarious things. So
Who doesn't?
who doesn't love buttered toast? I mean, there's these characters that are absolutely hilarious. And then from there, I really try to recommend parents to Newbery medal winning chapter books. Like, we're heading into chapter books, but there is this huge influx of graphic novels right now. I don't know if you guys have heard about that, but taking books, chapter books, even beloved classics, and turning them into graphic novels. And there's where Dave Pilkey comes in. He's had a huge influence there. That is fantastic. But we're always looking for, the hard part is as children get older, parents are like, they're into graphic novels, but is it literature? And I said, no. Not necessarily. It's fun. It's entertainment. It's just like when you go to the movies, right? Some are just purely for fun and entertainment, and they are reading. We want them to read. And then some really are going to challenge us and help us to learn. So we're always trying to reach for real, literature when we're trying to gain vocabulary, but we just want them immersed in books. So I could speak on that topic for probably another hour.
One area our daughter she's always been a very, very good reader.
Okay, that's great.
Nice flex.
Yeah. I was trying to, we're very fortunate, and I'll give my wife credit, okay? But I think what we've struggled with is age-appropriate books for advanced readers.
Yes.
If there's there's a huge opportunity for an aspiring author to write age-appropriate material for advanced sixth graders, because the material can get outside of what you want them reading or be outside of their exposure, but you also want to continue to challenge them so that they are staying engaged with reading. And so I think that if you're seeing the same thing, or if I'm just missing the boat on it.
Oh, no, absolutely. At the last education conference that I went to they're calling learners, different types of learners, exceptional learners today. So we're talking about the higher end, higher flyers, and then those that are struggling on the other end. And I spoke to someone who teaches at Berkeley in California, and that was the question I asked. She said she was teaching on the high flyers, our more gifted and talented children, and I said, please, is there a hidden list of books somewhere for kids that are in fourth grade that are reading at a high school level? Because we should, when we talk about reading, we should talk about the entire trajectory of kids that struggle all the way to those that need that extra challenge. She struggled to answer that question. And so I said one thing that we could do in the literacy world is at least start by putting together a list of classics for kids. Because I always refer parents, for those with higher flyers, to get a list of classic books. Tom Sawyer, depending on what you've covered in your family, Huck Finn, those Anne of Green Gables that are written with that higher level of more of an English old text. But that's such a great question, and I'm going to write that down. That's a good idea. I've always wanted to write some books, so thanks for the idea.
I'm not going to do it, so you run with it.
I was just going to ask. Have you ever written a book, or do you aspire to write a book to become an author?
That's a great question. I did take a couple of classes at the Loft for writing children's literature. I'm not going to lie. I love the Loft. It is a great place to learn about being a writer. But they talk about the industry being really volatile for children's books, and especially picture books, really hard to get them printed because it's more expensive for these illustrations. So they said the niche really is in not writing novels, easier to print and whatnot. But have I thought about it? Yeah. I think that might be something later in life, especially with my daughter. I have a 10-year-old daughter she says she wants to be an author and an illustrator. And so we keep talking about maybe it would be a joint venture someday.
Do you have one started sitting on your desktop? Just ideas of books?
Yes. I Roald Dahl, do you know what Roald Dahl wrote Charlie and the Chocolate Factory? He always kept a pocketbook in his front pocket for ideas. And so I have a tiny little book coined after him where I write. I've got about 10 ideas, but I do discuss them with my daughter because she says, like, she'll be like, Mom, or
I wouldn't read
that's
that.
a good one.
Yeah.
So,
You got to run it through the proper channels and filters to make sure.
yeah.
Is this a good idea?
She's a great critic, and she's one who loves graphic novels, so she'll just tell me, like, yeah or no. She's like, I'll totally illustrate that one for you, Mom.
Yeah, that is fun.
So we've kind of talked about the reading specialist, but
Yes.
Before we pushed record, you were talking about, developing this into a business.
Right.
You grew up, your parents had a business. Talk about maybe a little bit of the transition from doing what you love and helping, but then actually creating a business out of it.
Right. That's a whole new world for me. But yeah, you're right. Growing up in a family that had a business, I got to see and kind of watch some of the ins and outs of what my parents have done. And I think that's been a challenge for me. They always say do something every day that scares you, right? I'm sure that was from someone amazing, Eleanor Roosevelt or someone. But yeah, I mean, transitioning into a business, it's been a learning curve. I'm still learning a little bit about, if there's someone listening who knows more about LLCs that can educate me, I would appreciate it. But I've been a little bit lucky in that I have had my website, my business cards, and my logo for a really long time. Probably in my back pocket thinking, maybe someday I'm going to be a real adult and have my own office and do this and help more and more kids.
Yeah.
But finding this spot in Buffalo was a piece of cake. That part was fantastic. And it's so reasonable around here to find a place to do what you love, which I really appreciated. But yeah, that next part, I'm it. I'm doing the billing. I'm doing the marketing. I'm doing the advertising. I'm doing the tutoring. It's a one-woman show here. But I couldn't do it, of course, without the support of my family. My husband has been incredibly supportive of what I do. So yeah, getting it set up, getting the hours set up, and I'm using Google as my assistant to do all my Google Forms. I'm going into the next, step of doing Facebook videos and things like that. So it's a learning curve. I'm still on my way, still trying to figure out now what are the next steps and how do I continue to be successful as a local businesswoman.
Perfect.
Is there a busy time of the year? Is summer exceptionally busy because school's out and we don't want to lose progress? Is it a slow time of year because everybody's out of town?
Great.
Or does it stay pretty consistent?
Yeah, the summer is the busiest time for me as a tutor because then I can see children all day. With that said, vacation comes in. So when I'm actually try to be pretty organized. So when I get a summer tutoring client, the way I schedule it is I do kind of ask, what's your summer look like? Because here's the deal with intervention. This is so important for people to know. If you're going to invest the money to have your child get reading intervention, and let's say we schedule the summer and your child's going to have 15 sessions, but you're going to take 10 of those sessions off or 8 of those sessions off to go on vacation, look at the amount of time, because when we talk about intervention, we talk about intensity and duration. So if they're not getting the reading intervention consistently, that makes it really hard. So as far as summer being busy, absolutely. And then I really try to work with families, to say, let's have a consistent schedule. Let's have at least this many sessions, even if you're going on vacation. And I potentially see the fall being really busy too. I do have clients asking about what am I doing and how many slots I will have available. But the school year is harder because kids are if they're in school all day, then they can't tutor. But I do see homeschool families starting to reach out to me, or with this whole new distance learning idea, people are contacting saying, if my kids are home, would you be willing to do tutoring during the day with them online? So that's something that I'm looking into.
So being it is your busy time of year, assuming that you have a pretty full schedule, but if somebody did want to reach out to you and ask those questions about potentially setting something up, how would they get a hold of you?
So there's a couple of ways to get a hold of me. I do have a website, and it is...
You'll see it on the bottom of the screen right now.
There you go. I figured, because trying to say it, it's... Through my website, there's a contact button, so you can contact me through there. I also have a Facebook page, so you can contact me via Messenger that way. So those are probably the easiest ways to get a hold of me.
And that website was Betsy Kelly Reading Specialist.weebly.com.
Correct.
All right. Now you'll see it on the bottom.
Right
There you
there.
Yeah. Right there.
That's so handy.
Yeah.
And they can just quickly write that down.
Yeah.
And you might not want to answer this,
Yeah.
but as an educator, what was your take on distance learning? And it's okay if you don't want to answer this because we can edit it out.
I feel like I want to answer this question.
Okay.
But yeah, let's maybe take a look at
Sure.
it when I'm all done saying
Sure.
it. You know, the answer to this question lies oddly in a science fair project that a classmate of mine did years ago. She did this project where she had a TV screen teacher. You guys, this was back in the 90s. Oh, I'm getting old. Okay.
Wheeling that big TV in from the AV room.
That was it. So she had a teacher teach the lesson on the old camcorder, okay? Mm-hmm. Then she had that same teacher teach a lesson to a different class, same age group, 4th grade, I think it was. And she did this a few times with a few different grades to figure out which class responded better, the live teacher or the one on the video. Even back in the 90s, we find out there is no replacement for a human being teaching your children live in person.
You know where I'm falling on that.
I mean, teaching is so much more than delivering academic content. It's our relationships with them, it's being present with them, reading their emotions, being able to walk over and have that connection that drives them to learn. So distance learning, I just don't think it's for everyone. Mm-hmm. I think that from what we've learned, there are some kids that are like, man, I like to be at home, and maybe this homeschooling gig is for me. So maybe for some people they learn that. But for the majority of children, it was too much. How, as parents, do we work and teach our children? And some parents are thinking to themselves, I didn't go to school for this. I don't have education in my back pocket. And then my second reaction to it is we need our village. Our village is comprised of, for a lot of us, especially if we don't have extended family that we spend time with, our schools and our programs that our children are involved in. Look at friendships people make with kids on their hockey team, their parents. That's where they develop some of their lifelong friendships. Yeah. We need that. We need those human connections. And I think that was the biggest problem with distance learning, is just being a part of the village, having those connections with others. And I really worry about the developmental problems we're going to have and the learning that was not accomplished during this time. And so, of course, we want to take this situation in our country that we're facing in a pandemic seriously. But we also need very much to base our decisions in research to what are the consequences of our decisions. And that means as far as children's learning and their health and safety, we need to weigh both of those. Mm-hmm. I personally, as a mother, it was one of the most challenging things I had to do, but we also have a crisis going on in our country, so you have to weigh that. Mm-hmm. As an educator, to be honest with you, if that's what I'm asked to do, or if that's how my job is going to change, I don't know that I could continue to do it. It was hard.
Dropping real truth bombs on us here now.
I don't think you should edit that.
I think that's a great answer.
Yeah.
And I mean, we just like to have that conversation, and we find that to be a little bit more real of, instead of, well, this and then this. So thank you for answering that.
You're welcome.
We had the Hall of Fame inductees in last week and asked them the same thing. And they gave great answers, and, from their perspective as students, and
yeah,
that's good.
It's good to know. That's, again, I'm a big person who believes in data and research. That's what should be driving what we do. We shouldn't do something just because. We should do it based on what our numbers are telling us, and is it effective? And so our customers are the students. They'll tell us. I don't think first graders, especially, or kindergartners, I think that's one of the, high schoolers, college students, they can adapt to that because they're doing more of that anyway. Online, I taught at the graduate level an online course. So it's already in place,
Yeah.
So, but for little ones, I'm thinking about what I do. Even if I did Orton Gillingham online with somebody, okay? Just yesterday, I have a sand tray, so I have this really cool coarse orange sand and then fine grain green sand. And we're looking at trying to reform the letter correctly and efficiently and then say the letter sound. And the child kept wanting to form the letter the way they had done it since they were, 5 and now they're 12. So I had to go over and take their arm and help them physically because they just couldn't, even after me showing them do it. So I think distance learning wise, how do I go over and take the arm?
You have one of those grabbers like,
I don't know. I mean, it's complicated. No. It's complicated.
Yeah.
So anyway.
So as we're starting to kind of wind down here, we like to get to know our guest just a little bit more with a kind of a speed round, and we're going to change it up a little bit. We've got a couple of questions here. We're not going to ask you all 350 of them.
Okay.
But
100 is fine.
Yeah.
I'll take that.
But I've identified a couple here that I want to ask, but maybe Mark wants to start.
Sure.
Just whatever comes up to your mind right away. Don't have to explain it.
Okay.
Who would narrate your life? Who would you choose to narrate if you had a narrator?
Morgan Freeman.
I was thinking that.
I think everybody.
Welcome to Morgan Freeman's life.
Die slow, boys.
She walked into the kitchen to grab some coffee.
It's so calming. I could use a little of that in my life.
My other thought was maybe who's the McConaughey that everybody.
All right.
Oh.
The Affleck duck.
Yeah.
Oh,
Getting some coffee. Oh my gosh, this is so terrible. This is terrible radio.
Derailed.
What's the funniest joke you know by heart?
Oh my gosh. There was a mushroom in a bar, and nobody wanted to sit by him. He was drinking alone, and I'm sorry, I'm going to the bar here, but and nobody wanted to sit by him, he walks up to the bar and he's like, "Hey, you guys, why doesn't anybody want to sit and hang out with me and have a cocktail? I'm a fun guy."
I like it. Boom, roasted. I love it. That's awesome.
What movie can you watch over and over again and not get tired of it?
Zoolander.
Blue Steel.
Just dumb, funny. I don't have to think about anything else.
Mm-hmm. What song hits you with a wave of nostalgia every time you hear it?
And I meet in the middle, meet that old Georgia pine. Meet in the middle, Diamond Reel.
Perfect.
Last one for me. What are you interested in that most people aren't?
Reading research. Absolutely. Medical research, naturopathic medicine. Love it.
Probably didn't even have to ask that one.
Yes, sorry, I'm not interested in that.
No, that's fine. That's why, we have to have each person has their own unique thing they're interested in.
Yeah. Any parting words that you want to tell our great listeners of Buffalo Community Podcast?
Yes. We've lived in Buffalo, my family and I, just short of a year. I love our community. You take a risk when you move, right? Because you just don't know. I could not have been happier with our transition and the support that we've received in this community, not only for my business, but just as a family, the inclusivity and just the eclecticness of our community and the beauty with the lakes. And I'm so happy to be here.
Good. We're happy to have you.
Thank you.
For the Buffalo Community Podcast, I'm Tyler Reese.
I'm Mark Benzer.
Betsy Kelly, reading specialist.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, you guys. That was fun.
That was well.
Yeah. Whenever we, kind of, what are we going to do? I don't know. Our first couple of guests.